Let's call this meeting to order. Amanda? Need the tape. Did we get the tape on, ma'am, or is it running?
Still running.
Sorry about it.
Good, fine. Give it to you, I'll sit on it.
It's running? Okay.
Paul Horniman, Anchorage Assembly. Pete Peterson, Anchorage Assembly.
Ellie Gray Jackson.
Dick Trainee?
Amy DeMosky.
Phil Evans.
Julia Tucker, Assembly Council.
So the people from respective organizations, identify yourself, for the record, please.
Jake Moe, Municipal Light and Power.
Marty Smith with MLMP.
Maya Johnson, MLNP.
Joe Griffith, MEA.
Mark Johnston, MLMP.
Bill Bernier, Chugach Electric.
Matt Peterson, ACS.
Larry Smith, ACS.
Erica McConnell, Planning Department.
Gary Haynes, DCI.
Rebecca Colton, GCI.
Thanks for being here. Let's start off with Municipal Light and Power. Talk to us about undergrounding, please.
You bet. Well, thank you for letting me come, and thank you, Councilwoman Gray Jackson, for inviting us. Today we're talking about the Title 21 underground project and the little hiccup. So I'm going to start with what it is and what we have been doing, and then we'll go to the problem at the end. In 2005, the ordinance was passed by the Assembly to put a program into place that says all new lines will need to be undergrounded. There were some exceptions to that, such as transmission lines or in industrial zones or even in swamplands, places that we couldn't underground. It also said that electric utilities were to create an underground plan, a plan to underground our lines. And that's also known as the 5-year plan. Existing lines, removing the existing lines to underground. And then also it mentions that all utilities are to report the expenditures to the MOA Planning Department, which apparently the communication utilities have not been doing that. So how is it paid for? When you look at your utility bill, or your electric utility bill from MLP, there is a 2% surcharge on the bottom. That goes into paying for that underground program. There's state statute which says that you can do that, that all utilities can do that, and again, not all utilities do that for whatever reason. And then for MLP, that equals out to be about $1.9 million a year that we can spend to get those overhead lines underground. So you might ask, how do we decide which areas to go first? Well, I won't go into too much details, but these are some of the factors we look at. You know, we still have some 1950 poles out there that's going to get a higher rating than those newer poles. I do want to put emphasis on the customer request. I'm not sure how Chugach or MEA does it, but we do take consideration of customer requests. Just this fall, I had 90 people sign a petition to get their neighborhood underground. It's very popular. I get phone calls and emails, and even community councils sometimes pass things to get it underground quicker or specify where their need is. And then also mentioned on the bottom the other various factors. If there's a road project, we definitely cooperate with road projects and get it down at the same time to make it efficient. So we take those factors and we have annually we have a review. MLP has a review committee, and together we put a 5-year plan. And it's available on our website. And I also have some hard copies here if anybody would like to look at that. And then when we're done, we send that to MOA Planning Department, and then they put the final check off that they have seen it. And then all those projects that we reviewed that didn't make the 5-year plan, it just compiles in a big list for projects to look at the next year. So, but we do keep that running, and then so every year we relook at it and have the chance to add it on the 5-year plan. And I also wanted to note that in MLP we try to stay real consistent. Once you're on that 5-year plan, it's almost like you're locked in. We're not going to put projects in front of you. We try to keep it in order. So that's something. So what to expect during construction? I'm sure everyone's seen construction. It's very disruptive and lots of equipment. And when we go into these neighborhoods, it's a very inconvenience for people. That picture actually both the trench pictures have all 3 utilities with MLP, GCI, and ACS in those trenches. So there's signs of good working sharing the trench or joint trench construction, what we call it. And then that middle one is a fault that we're setting. For the electric side, it also requires inspection of your interior wiring, because anytime you connect an overhead underground to your meter base, the MOA inspector has to put his green stamp of approval on it, and he has to look at everything and see if it's up to code. Sometimes these houses in these old neighborhoods aren't up to code, and unfortunately it ends up being kind of a little bit more project cost on MLMP side to get these up to code. But I just want to also emphasize that it's another inconvenience for these owners, and it takes a lot of coordination on our part to work with them. Definitely we'll need easements. Here's one where we needed a 10-foot by 10-foot easement to place transformer, and then pedestals. There's GCI and ACS also has their pedestals there, and we share easements. We also have easements on swaths of land, like along the border, where 5-foot easement along the whole side of the property so we can dig our trench. And landscaping, shrubs, trees, fences, sheds, anything that could be in the way may need to be moved. That picture seems pretty destructive, but I put it there, kind of showed that we had to remove a shrub and we had to take down some fence. And when it's said and done, we reseed it, put the fence back, and hopefully better than it was beforehand. And this is what the final product should look like. We have a pole out here, lots of lines, lots of overhead, and now you have free clear space in the air, just a street light and a few pedestals down below. A lot more appealing, I would say, to the neighborhood. Here's another picture, same thing. It's kind of quite the impression it makes when you see it there and when it's not there. So in summary of just the informational part here, it does take a lot of coordination. We get together, we make that 5-year plan, we send to the planning department. We work with other utilities, we send ACS and GCI our 65% design, and then we send them the final one. We work with all the other utilities because they're already in the ground, such as water and sewer, and sometimes it takes a lot of moving. And then the big one is customers. We have to work with them on their design. We're going to be digging in their yard. They know their yard way better than we do, so I got to work with them. I mentioned before easements. That's probably one of the hardest parts of these projects, even though a lot of these owners are very cooperative because they're getting that overhead underground which they want. So they do cooperate, but it can be a hard part. And then of course, like I said, that inside wiring and then the outside work with those features that I showed you before. So the question and the problem at hand is, will all utilities go underground? Well, according to Title 21, they're supposed to. Anytime the pole owner puts their lines underground, anyone attached to it has to go underground at the same time. There is a little loophole, and I underlined that. It says an attached utility is not required to expend more than 2% of its annual gross retail revenue. Is ACS and GCI, have they exceeded that? I don't know. I haven't seen it, and apparently the planning department hasn't seen it either. So I know that could be a reason why they're not cooperating, but that's the one loophole that I've seen that would allow for that. And then also to mention, there is a state statute which says the same thing. It does not have that loophole in it, so I don't know which one trumps the other one. But it just says that whenever the pole owner goes under, it has to go underground at the same time. And then also on the last sentence here of the state statute, it points that each utility is responsible for their own costs. So what happens when they don't underground? MLP has no authority to enforce. We can ask them to, but really we don't have the hammer to do that. And of course, for these neighborhoods, it would be considered a failure. And personally for me, I think I take pride in my projects, and I would consider this a failure too if they remain. So the poles would remain in place, the tops would get cut off above where they're attached, and then MLP would transfer the ownership of those poles to either ACS or GCI. Here's what hits at home. Picture before and after. Our utility lines are on the top. MLP removes them, we cut them off, and the owner dealt with all the construction of the summer season and still has that to look at. So that's kind of where this complaint is coming from the airport heights. And probably other neighborhoods if this continues. So this is the project that I would say brought it to head today, is the Noreen Street undergrounding. It's off the bar in Berghoff, in the Airport Heights Community Council. We were to underground about 1.2 miles, and ACS and GCI both let us know that they were not going to participate this year. So the construction right now, we're about middle of the project, and they haven't participated. Also gotten read that since 2005, they have participated with us. There has been a few cases where they were dragging their feet, but this is the first year where they haven't participated at all. If GCI and ACS does underground with us, the efficiency of joint trench will be lost. Like I showed you that picture, trench is wide while it's open. That's the time to put your stuff in. Otherwise, you got to dig it again. And that's the neighborhoods will be inconvenienced twice. And I don't think we want to do that. And then lastly, this easements, and it almost seems unethical for me. I have a project next year, 23 easements I need. I have easements sitting on my desk waiting to give the ask for them. I don't feel right asking them for easements when I don't know if the poles are actually going to come down. And that's kind of the key point on MLP is they're trying to do a project for the neighborhood and it's not happening the way it's supposed to be. So what happens next? How can projects be made successful for neighborhoods that look like this and look like that? That's what I have.
Thank you. We've got some assembly questions. For some members that have a question, let's do your questions with MLNP, and I want to get to the other utilities that are here too. Mr. Honeman first.
Yeah. Reference the 5-year plan, and I know that you say it equates so far at this time up to about 1.9 million a year. On the 5-year plan, is there any way you can estimate, I mean, it's going to take probably more than 5 years to underground everything, right, at 1.9 million a year coming in?
Yeah, I don't know if the slide got missed there, but it's going to take us about 180 to 200 years to get all these overhead lines down at this pace.
So without extra funding revenue or
Correct.
people pitching in somehow or another, car washes or bake sales to do it?
That is correct, yeah. It's going to take a long time, and I tell
180 or 180 years.
I tell people you got to be patient. Yeah. Construction is costly.
We have different technologies that send it wirelessly to your house. Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I would imagine that once these are undergrounded, maintenance becomes much less costly than there was prior. There's less chance of an automobile running into the pole and wind blowing the lines down and many other things. So isn't this actually good for the utilities in the long run?
I would say it is. We have less outages. I would note that when an outage does occur on an existing cable, it may take just a little bit longer. It's not as easy to find when it's not up in the air to see. But on the number of outages, you're decreasing that by a lot.
And
Mr.
especially in the
Peterson?
winter time with frozen ground, it will take longer to restore power.
Thank you. Mr. Brodsky?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm sorry, I didn't hear your name in the beginning.
My name's Jake Moe.
Mr. Mo, okay. All right. Well, Mr. Mo, I have a couple of questions. First, in the examples that you were showing in some of these neighborhoods, when you go to bury the lines, how long is an average project like that?
How long does it take? It takes a full construction, a summer season.
Full summer to do
Yeah,
it?
because they have to go to, it depends on the size of the project.
Sure, that makes
The
sense.
Noreen Street deals with 40 properties, and it's going to take 90 days is what our construction time is on.
90 days, you said?
90 days.
And
yeah.
during that period of 90 days, how long could an average homeowner expect to be without power? I would assume there's a cutoff date where you turn it off one day, you try to string it, get it back up as soon as possible, but how long would they?
Less than 4 hours.
Oh, that's great.
They put it underground before they take the overhead down.
Yeah, it would make sense, there'd be some sort of mechanism there. How many joint projects would you say, you referenced the fact that this is the first project that ACS and GCI didn't jump on board and say, yeah, we're gonna go for it with you. How many projects would you say have there been joint ventures where the three entities have come together?
I think every project we've done.
How many?
We do 1 or 2 a year, so since 2005, 9 or 10.
And then another comment, you said to get everything done in it would take about 180 years. Mr. Train probably listens to me on the assembly then. Okay, the other.
You'll
real
never
quick-
get it, you've got CA, you have what?
We have
NTA
MEA.
out
We
there.
have MEA, yeah. But
We'll get to Joe
another,
in a minute.
another interesting point, listening to what you were saying, I absolutely respect that you take pride in what your work, and, you know, you're emotionally invested because you want to do a great job for the people. You said MLMP dedicates about 2%, this 2% to these types of projects each year.
Yes.
Do you have any idea how much the ACS and GCI allocate to these types of projects each year?
No, I don't.
Yeah, you said that. So, you know, and that brings me back to some of the emotional responses in the presentation. I would probably prefer it if they're left out because there's that big unknown. And being a private company, you have no idea what their financial position is, you know.
Right.
Doesn't sway me, but thank you.
Mr. Steele, sir.
Thank you. I have a couple questions. First off, when you have a trench open and they're not prepared to do it, can't you just throw wire in the trench at least and help them out so it doesn't have to be retrenched? Can't you just throw their wire in the trench?
Throw wire in?
Disconnect. As a matter of fact, you guys did that for ACS. They weren't prepared to put anything in the trench. And
I think what you're thinking is sometimes they'll give us conduit, we'll lay in the conduit, and then they can come back later and pull their wire and underground at a different time. That's
Okay,
right.
mine wasn't in the conduit,
Right.
either yours or anybody else's. I had it done this summer, but I had it done before I bought the house in 1980. It was undergrounded, and this time it came out that there were a lot of costs involved in doing it again, and because it wasn't part of the program, it was a request to upgrade. Does the homeowner have to pay for the drop for replacing the box
On this program,
under the program? Okay. Who pays for any upgrades within the house if there are upgrades?
that's part of covers under the 2% that we collect. We do try to limit that now. We've kind of seen that cost could get going, so we limited that. If it's something abundant, then the owner would step in.
And you said transmission lines obviously are another item. I happen to live a block from a street that has both Chugach and MLMP transmission lines going down, and they're going to upgrade that road this year. And I'm just wondering if anything is going to happen to that or not. If those poles are still going to be in the middle of the sidewalk when they're through with the street upgrade. That's part of it because I've done
So,
Anyway, let me say it's great in terms of security. I mean, in terms of outages. My neighborhood, most of my neighborhood has overhead lines. The last 2 outages that we had in the neighborhood, my house wasn't out because I was on a transformer and undergrounded. And actually, one time everybody was out except me, and I was afraid to put my lights on because I didn't want to embarrass them. Anyway, you guys do a great job.
Ms. Gray Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have quite a few questions to ask, and I just want to say that the biggest reason, well, the reason for this work session, oh great, thank you. The reason for this work session is because of the issue at Noreen, which is Mr. Training and Lines District. We've got lots of phone calls. We have some of our constituents here today. People are really pissed off. And I just didn't realize that ACS and GCI has been cooperating with you until this project. Why'd you wait till it got into our district? But anyway, with that said, we really need to figure out how to work this out. We're going to hear from ACS and GCI in a moment, but I mean, it's really pathetic, in my opinion, that, you know, the Janice Schamberg ordinance, because that's when it happened, when Janice Schamberg was on the assembly. But anyway, it's a wonderful idea, but if, you know, you go through a lot of trouble tearing up the streets and inconveniencing people, and then it looks the same, you know, I'm still getting phone calls, both of us, from our constituents asking us, well, what's going to happen? And we don't have any answers, you know, and it's just, this is not a good situation that's happening right now. And I respect and appreciate Mr. Bossi's comments in regard to you know, co-op and private company in your finances, but, you know, it's the law from what I just saw. I have a whole lot of other questions, but I won't go there right now. But one last question is, how wide and deep does the trench have to be?
In right-of-way, it's 42 inches deep.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Deep, but how wide?
A wide hole, it depends on how many conduits. I would say 3 feet, pretty typical. 3 feet, depends on how many entities are in the trench.
Thank you. Joe, presenting MEA?
I don't have a presentation, I just got my first call on this yesterday. Our program.
We're always ready to go, Joe. We're not dealing with, wires overhead.
Well, yeah, we are. That's all of us.
The big ones you have out there.
The big ones are transmission, and you don't put transmission underground, contrary to what the mayor of Wasilla wants to do. Exactly what they said here is our program. We collect a 2% surcharge on everything from the way station to the Connect River Bridge. That's about $505,000 a year, and we invest every bit of it. As of right now, we're about $500,000 in the hole. But it's going to take a long, long time to underground everything between the way station and the bridge, as you heard he said. But we have an active program underway. We face perhaps even more difficult problems because the rights of way and all were not procured properly back when Eagle River was first built out 25, 30 years ago. And that is a problem. And people get really mad when you come in and tear out their fences and their sheds and all of that. But to get it underground, you have to do it. We have not had any problem with the phone company. It works pretty good in getting them in. Now, we've got new players in that game, and I have no idea how that's going to work out. But I think the program's a success, and when Janice conceived it, and I sat in this very room, and we talked about it when we put it together, and I think it's working pretty much like we wanted it. 2% is a small sum, though. And it, as the MLP said, it's going to take a long, long time to get them all.
I just wanted to comment too. I know I have a $2 charge every month on it because it's undergrounded. I'm not quite sure why, but that's a point that I think folks need to know. There is a little additional cost.
Through the chair,
Go ahead, sir.
is the $2, did you mean 2%?
I mean $2. It's just a $2 charge on my bill every month for underground services.
Must mean $100 bill. Because it is 2%, I think, that we
Is
both
it?
put on.
Maybe I'm
I
misreading.
believe Chugach does the same thing.
Exactly.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, follow up,
Easier.
Steele, thank you for mentioning that, but we're all paying that, not just you. We're paying for the.
For the program?
For the program, yeah. Yes, we are.
Okay.
We all are.
I'm misreading my bill.
Mhm.
Well,
Anything-
I wasn't in the queue, but, I do have a question.
That's it. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Chugach Electric?
Yeah, my name is Bill Burrier, I'm with Chugach Electric, and the presentation, ours would have been largely just like that, had we not just found out about this yesterday. The only thing I would add to the presentation is that each year when the projects come up to be done, some projects, one project can eat up the whole year's worth of money, and if it's a smaller project, we might be able to do 2 or 3, but we use the undergrounding properly. It will take decades and decades and decades to underground all the facilities within the boundary of the undergrounding ordinance. And like Joe said, we don't underground transmission lines unless it's a place that you obviously have to underground them, like across Lake Arm and turning them on, and underneath the runways at the airport. Other than that, transmission lines belong overhead. And we have the same basic plan. We contact ACS and GCI. They are aware of our plan. We've done projects together. When we finish, sometimes we start a project, we finish first, so we chop the poles off just above the communications attachments and turn the job over to ACS and GCI to do their pieces. Usually they, once they've got pipe in the ground, sometime in their work plan, they'll come back, pull the wire. The last person to vacate a pole, the rule is, the last one that vacates the pole retires the pole. So that's why we cut them off just above the communications attachment, so when they come along, they've just got the shorter poles to deal with once their plant's off the poles. And cleanup, we just finished a job, if you drive along to the road, where we finished our work, the poles are cut off, and we're cleaning up around our new facilities, and presumably sometime down the road, ACS will come along, pull their wire, and wreck those poles out. So that's the way it works. It is 2% on all the Chugach members' bills every month that live within the undergrounding ordinance area, and the project, it works. We submit our 5-year update annually and get it to them.
Thank you, sir. Pete?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, and the reason I had him call you, invite you to this session today was because we're doing some undergrounding over by Cheney Lake this year. And that is an area that when we had the bad windstorm in September of 2012, the power was out for approximately 5 days in that area. And so I'm glad to see you undergrounding the wires there. The neighbors have contacted me and are wondering why all the wires aren't going to be going under at the same time, besides just the electric wires. And so we're hoping to we can work out some sort of agreement so that we can all work together, and so that the neighbors are happy, and once there's a trench dug and it goes underground, that everyone goes in there, and it's got if maintenance is less, it's good for everyone in the long run, it seems to me. So that's the reason why I had to stop by today. Thank you, Carl.
We go through the same process as ML&P and MEA does in picking which projects we're going to put underground. All of those things are considered damage in storms, age, condition, use shed, those kinds of things. It's all part of the mix. I don't serve on the committee that does the 5-year plan, but I know all those things get taken into consideration as the plan evolves and projects get added and shifted around to be done.
Can you give me an estimate of what your 2% generates each year?
It's somewhat more than ML&P's. I don't have the number right off the top of my head, but I would guess it's somewhere in the neighborhood of $2.5 to $3 million, probably.
Any other questions from senior leadership? Let's move on to the next ones, our telephone group.
I'm Matt Peterson, so I head up engineering at ACS. And to start off, I'd say that, like I say, we really support the program. We have made a decision not to levy an additional assessment on our customers just due to the environment that we compete in.
So you guys have made the choice not to charge the fee?
That's correct. So we fund this out of our normal capital plan, which does make it a little bit different situation for us. And in the past, there really hasn't been enough projects for us to have to come to this kind of decision about which ones we participate in and which ones we don't. So this year we started to make those selections. And this is one project that we decided not to participate in, just due to the costs and the benefit besides the program, and where we could potentially speak to other factors that went into that decision.
Questions from the members?
One point on that is because there's so many providers of phone service. In one neighborhood, you may have a lot of different people providing phone service, and therefore it would become ridiculous.
That's one of the things we look at, is how many subscribers do we have in a particular area.
I know ML&P said they have an agreement with the authority line wire, or authority wire in the hole if it was I requested to be put in there. So I've got a line that's not, I currently don't have service where I see this, but I have had it. So there's a line that's not connected, but it's there. So it's good.
Mr. Greg Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, first off, for everybody, utilities and for being here, for coming. I really appreciate that. But we need to figure out how we're going to deal with this situation. We really do, because, I mean, your customers are our MLP's customers and so forth, and they're really not happy, you know, at all. And I don't blame them one bit. So,
Larry Smith, Easements. I think what started all of this is we have two power companies that we have to do overhead to underground with. We have GS Electric and MLP. So both of them give us their 5-year plan. I usually get those and I'll go through and I'll do a rough cost and what it would cost to underground our telephone facilities in these areas. I'll pass those costs on to the VPs and my boss, and they'll decide. I think what was it, $600,000 that we had this year to do, but I identified like $3 million worth of undergrounding just for the power companies. So I don't know if we're required or we're supposed to do all the undergrounding for the power companies and spend more than our 2%. That's for others to choose, but we have two power companies that we have to do with. And this project here, we had, with Noreen, we had 15 customers. MLP gave me an estimate to throw a conduit in for us for $84,000. That's $84 a foot in a ditch. That's pretty extreme. I think our stance is, and I think we might be able to back it up, is if they open up the ditch, we'll provide the conduit, but don't charge us for the ditch. We'll pay for the conduit and the installation of the conduit. We'll more likely pull the cable through the conduits and do the cutovers and put everybody's service in. And I think that is more of an economical solution for probably both of GCI and us. But right now, we're at $84 a foot to put conduit, just a hole in the ground. That's not including the cable, cutting the customers over, or any of that. So it's not economical.
Mr. Browski has a question.
I do, and I'm going to direct my question to MLP. So, playing off of what Mr. Smith is saying, you guys are cutting the ditch anyways. If they're willing to pay for installation of the conduit, is there a deal to be struck with MLP, not charging $84 a foot?
The trench that we would have to dig by ourselves if we were only putting in our conduits, you know, in the Noreen Street, it's two 2-inch conduits. So we need a really narrow trench. In the estimate of doing that, in our work, we estimate that a lot of the times we have to replace all the dirt if we don't know what the dirt is going to be when we pull it out. So we need to make sure we estimate to get good dirt, good compaction back in, replace the asphalt. If it's under a road, replace curb and gutter if we're cutting through, and replace landscaping along that disturbed area. When we add COM to that trench, we're required by the NESC code to have a foot separation from the electric utilities conduits to the COM conduits. And then you have ACS and GCI, which we typically lay together with their request, because otherwise you'd have to have another 12 inches separation between those two. So we try and keep the COM and the electric separated for maintenance issues. If COM's digging that trench down because it's the same level, we don't want them to be, and it's all going to be great conduit, but we don't want to make sure that they get into the electric conduit by accident. So we have that separation. So now your trench is at least twice as wide. Your area of disturbance, your area of fill, asphalt, curb, gutter is higher. And in our joint use agreement, we have a percentage breakdown that covers all of that, depending on the number of parties that are participating in that joint use trench.
Reasonable answer. I mean, obviously it's more work, so that makes sense.
Any questions, semi-members?
I have a question, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you respond to the comment that Marty just made?
What he said is true, but if you look at one of his pictures there, all the conduits are in the same ditch. And if you're familiar with construction, if you watch some of this construction goes on, they normally throw the conduit in right next to each other on most of these jobs anyways. So, I mean, the separations issue, when it's in a conduit, I think construction bends those practices a little bit out in the field. But what Marty said is true, that we do have to maintain that separation, but is it really done all the time?
And if I could follow up, and I don't mean to keep going back and forth, but I really want to see something worked out. I really do, on behalf of my constituents. So I want to hear what your response is to his comments, if you will. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Maybe some of the other utilities can chime in too, but we design our trenches for the foot separation between the electric and comm. We have an electrical inspector on the job to ensure that those separations are maintained. So I would disagree with Mr. Smith in that regard.
Comment, sir.
All right. And I haven't heard GCI's presentation yet, and I suspect it'll probably be more online with ACS because I saw some head knocking. The ordinance specifically states that when the undergrounding happens, that it all goes together. And I recognize that it has a limitation that you're not required to spend more than 2% of your annual gross income or whatever the wording language is. So that, to me, shows there's affirmative language that you will do it. Unless you can show otherwise, why not? That you exceeded it's going to exceed you whatever the 2%. I firmly believe that you should make as much money as you could on your business. I happen to have ACS, GCI, and Chugach and ML&P in 2 different homes in 2 different parts of town. So MEA is the only one I don't have. I'm not that far out in your service area.
Happy to have you, Paul.
Love to afford a place out in Talkeetna. My issue is that, as Ms. Gray Jackson said, and I'm very familiar because Noreen is actually about 3 or 4 blocks from my rental property, and I was very much involved in the conversation, and I thought this was something that we all had agreed on. The neighborhood was concerned, and it was having to do with, I believe, refuse collection, and there was a whole lot of issues that were going on surrounding it. So obviously there was a glitch here, and I too, I guess I need to find out whether or not we have to change the ordinance to make sure that people are following the ordinance, because I think the ordinance was fairly clear. I just think it's fairly clear that you do it. And it makes sense to me that if there's 3 utilities or 4 utilities, Chugach, ML&P, GCI, ACS, you dig a trench, it's divided by 4. I mean, it seems almost like simple math. It seems like it would be cheaper to do it that way than to have one trench dug and then later come back and have another trench dug and then remove a pole. I mean, I sympathize and empathize with competitiveness of the market, but you're allowed to collect 2% to do this, and you're choosing not to. I guess that's my question. If you're allowed to do the 2%, you've chosen not to, and then you've chosen not to follow the ordinance, which is law. And I'd like to know what the intent is. I'm not trying to be flippant or anything. I just want to know if we have to change the law. Yet again, we can. I don't like to have to do that, but I just want to know, can we work out something where we can go forward and abide by the law and help you to try to defray some of your costs?
I've got one more utility to go through, and that'll be GCI next. So, Mr.
I'll
Evans,
hold
any
my
questions
question.
for the current one?
Yeah.
I'll get back to you.
Just a quick question. The
Promise.
committee that puts together the 5-year plan, does that include GCI and ACS? So, I mean, the idea is the electric utilities get together, decide what they're going to underground, and then
I don't think they get together.
And MEA, and
each does their own stuff.
Each does their own.
Okay.
GCI,
Yes.
not to leave you out of this wonderful discussion, sir.
Gary Haynes, with GCI. I agree with what ACS has, and we're very similar. We don't charge the 2%. We're in a competitive market. We don't know how many houses we're going to have on the block. Depends on how good his offer is this week versus what my offer is this week. So not having 100% of the homes, our costs per home is pretty high to put these in. We don't object to getting into the trenches. We do it a lot. our only objection in some of these, like Noreen, is the apportionment of costs. With Chugach Electric and with MEA, we have a joint use agreement, and we pay a fixed cost for a portion of that trench. It's very predictable for us, it's a per foot cost, and it's easy for us to make decisions. With MLP, we have to take a percentage of the total cost, and sometimes that cost can be quite high, depending on how they have to put in the facilities. So it's a lot cheaper for us to put them in our full cost than it is for a little bit of cost. That's how we make decisions. It's just an apportionment issue for us.
Yeah, I guess my question is, don't you guys use the same cable? And
No.
why can't there be a shared aspect of the cable where you have one wire may have 6 pairs, 5 pairs, whatever it is, and for phone, and one cable installation, and the homeowner hooks up to ask whoever is going to provide the service, and that there's a shared use of that cable.
We don't share facilities. They have coax, we've got cable pairs, copper cables.
And the architecture sometimes is different enough that we're, over on Marine, we're actually, our routing isn't totally the same as the ditch, so it complicates, which is another reason that we decided not to.
It just seems to me if there's a junction box somewhere, that could be a nice way to do it, but it's.
The architecture is
You have
different
the,
enough.
architecture of the systems.
Mr. Evans, sir.
I don't know if I had a comment, but it just seems to me that one of the fundamental problems with the statute and our situation is you have 2 different types of companies with 2 different economic models relating to that, and so it almost seems as if your undergrounding provisions would have to take into account that difference in order to be equitable. Because at some point, where you have 4 customers versus the electric utility, which has everybody on the block, it is a significant cost differential, and we're actually making the one utility, the telephone or the telephone cable, pay a significant amount more for that undergrounding per capita, it seems, than we are with the electric utility. So it seems that it needs to be tweaked. It seems like the solution is possible, but trying to force everybody into this one kind of generic structure seems to be causing the problem.
I think technology has changed dramatically because you can put your line down, ACS can, and there are those of us that use wireless that don't have a wired phone. GCI can put their cable down, those of us that use satellite that don't ever need to have a wire. As the technology changes, I can understand your concern because there's less people that use your service. Or, you're providing good service, but they choose other ways to get that service. And that's a real problem, trying to mandate undergrounding for everybody. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and that was sort of what my question was about, the fact that the market might be changing and fewer people are maybe having landlines and are going strictly to a cell phone. And so maybe the 2 competing phone companies don't feel like it's worth the investment to underground lines when a few years from now the number of landlines in that neighborhood might be only a handful or a couple. So I was just wondering if that had anything to do with some of the decision making.
Well, we also have another company, it's not here, Verizon, will soon be doing a lot of services over that wireless network. So you've got to take all that into consideration. Decide how much money you afford to put in infrastructure, which you may not be using in a few years.
Email and Pete, could you guys email us your PowerPoint presentation? Because you're the one that did one. We appreciate it. You can email it to us, to the assembly clerk, and she'll make distribution. I appreciate it.
So what's the solution?
Well, that's for the assembly members.
Well, I'd like to
think
have
about it.
some experts say, hey, here's the solution, here's my solution.
Go ahead, ma'am.
I always have the answer. I'm just kidding. One of
You
the
don't want to be around here when it's finally underground and age-wise.
maybe. But Mr. Evans kind of hit the nail on the head a little bit, but I heard 2 things. One, part of the problem, as I'm identifying it, is the utilities, obviously each utility creates their own 5-year plan. And when they decide these are the projects we're going to go on, it may not mesh with the phone company's 5-year plan. So part of this development for undergrounding may be beneficial for the three entities that are going to be together to create a joint 5-year plan when it comes to actually undergrounding. That's kind of common sense first. But the second point, GCI made a great perspective. Mr. Haynes made a great point when he said, you know, the deal they have struck with these other 2 utilities has been beneficial and cost effective. They've been able to swallow the cost of those. But ML&P is the one that's out of the loop here. You don't have the same type of agreement, I'm assuming. You have he said it's structured differently. So that might be something ML&P and these other phone companies might be able to get together and kind of relook at your position in this contract or this agreement and see if there is any room to maybe move a little bit. Because then it could be a win-win for everyone in that, I mean, it may end up costing MLP a little bit more, but wouldn't it be better to have a whole lot more done? So it's just something to think about. But, you know, just thinking outside of what I'm hearing today, those are 2 comments that I think ML&P leadership should look at very hard.
Through the chair, I would be interested to see an ACS or GCI 5-year plan, because I don't know that they have one for undergrounding. They're not required to by the ordinance. It's only electric utilities that are required to have a 5-year plan. Secondly, the joint use agreement that you responded to, we just recently within April of last year, we redid our joint use agreement with GCI based on the terms that we have based on what I told you about the different widths of the trench. They are in there, they're taking 1/3 of their whole trench, so they've agreed to that just as of last year. We are currently in negotiations with ACS to update a joint use agreement as well, and those same terms are in there. I mean, we're really close to signing that. It's in actually legal review, I think. Yeah?
ACS still.
ACS still has it, okay. I wouldn't be opposed to comparing our joint use agreements with the other electric utilities and see how they work their joint use agreements. Realize as well that should the decision be made that the electric utility take all the cost of the whole trench and everything that goes in it, the amount of the 2% goes less, and so less gets done.
Well, in reality, you may look at it and say, no, our agreement's better. I don't know because I have not read them. But I would think in the spirit of cooperation and good faith, I think it would be an avenue just to evaluate.
You can do that.
You said earlier when you guys abandoned a pole, you cut the top of it off.
Right, about 1 foot above the upper communication.
But who's responsible for the pole? The rest of the utilities that are on it, whether it's ACS or GCI?
The company that has the upper conductor.
The upper one.
The upper cable attachment. So it could be ACS, it could be GCI.
Who's responsible for maintaining the poles? In other words, if they're rotten, getting rid of them? ACS or GCI reservoir on the top of the pole?
Right. So our joint use talks includes language to that regard. So if we're going to pull all our facilities off that, we write a letter to the communication company that has the upper attachment, telling them that we're removing this, and if they don't remove their facility within 30 days, which is part of the joint use agreement, they inherit the pole and hold ML&P harmless from that point on, and it's their responsibility to maintain and retire.
Okay. Then how would the neighbors know who to call if they think the pole was rotten? Or do they crawl up and see whose line's at the top of the pole? I mean, you guys put a marker on the pole that says, hey, this pole is now the responsibility of ACS or GCI. How would the neighbors know?
That's a good question.
You see what's up there and you follow it to the house and ask for the service.
I just want to know, because some of my neighbors are concerned about the poles
Isn't there a
being
peg
rotten.
loader on the poles? It's power, then telephone, then cable, isn't that how it works? The power's
Power is
gone, the
always
telephone,
on the
the telephone's
top.
not there. then-
And it's different in both places. Here in Anchorage, uses Roosevelt phone and Napa Valley, it's it just depends. And then you
Mr.
get
Jackson?
variances.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, I appreciate Mr. Mbowski's comments, and my hope is that there's some willingness from ACS, GCI, to work with MLMP to come to some agreement on behalf of our community, which is first and foremost. And, well, everybody, however they say, work together. I don't see anybody smiling. There you go. I mean, I just think it makes sense to at least make some effort. You know, again, on behalf of our community, that's what it's about.
Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Honan?
Okay, so I'm going to go back to, and I'll leave it as a comment. It's rhetorical, apparently. I'm not one to put anybody on the spot. I am asking for compliance with the law as stated. And I want to use these as an example. I have an AT&T cell phone that I use mostly for work. I have an ACS cell phone that I use mostly for personal. It was accidental, believe it or not, but it was because of the better deal this week as opposed to last week, okay? Offer I couldn't pass up. But on each of these phones, I'm paying a RCA mandated state law, by state law, surcharge for E911. I have no choice in the matter. It gets covered, it pays, and it's ACS, AT&T, it's competitive market, right? Who's got the better deal? The surcharge is the same. The surcharge is the same. So I would urge you, as much as it pains me to say, that I have GCI and ACS and MLMP and Chugach. I'm paying automatically on MLMP and Chugach apparently because both of you agree that that's what you're doing, correct? You're charging the 2% surcharge to the customers for the undergrounding?
Yeah.
Okay. I would urge you to consider that as part of your business model so that you can assist in perhaps your share of whatever that cost would be. As much as I don't want to pay more, nobody really does, but it's allowed by law, and it would likely help you to be able to meet your obligations and defray your costs not coming off profit. Because then you could clearly say, hey, this is the percentage we've got to work with. I understand it, because if you're saying, hey, my business model is they've got more lines over there, let's see who budgets first, because if they throw it down there, then we don't have to, or whatever, vice versa. Because as I understand it, telephone lines, years ago anyway, telephones used to be strictly whoever had you used to call it up and say, hey, I want to be in this company this week or the other. But now cable is a little bit different, of course. In any event, that's a suggestion, as well as trying to sit down and figure out this joint user agreement or whatever. Perhaps they do have a better modeling that makes it more affordable for the utilities to do. So I ask for compliance with the law. I certainly am willing to look at the law if that's what it needs to be changed, but I think the law's there. I think it's fairly clear, and I think you have an opportunity to pay for it. So I would ask, please, I'll help facilitate if we have to. Yes.
Ms. Ray Jackson?
Thank you, Mr.
Final
Chairman.
comment?
So, in order for both Mr. Train and I to report back to our Noreen folks, I guess they're just SOL. And, went through all that process for everything to still look the same. Is that what I can tell you? Hello?
GCI's intent is to go into the neighborhood, but we don't follow all of the trenches they do, so we just have pieces of it, what they're doing right after they're finished.
Anyway, they're pretty unhappy. So, whatever the consequences is in terms of other things, I don't know, but anyway, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Steele?
One other quick question. I do have an issue down between Arctic and 22nd, kind of in that neck of the woods, where there was some undergrounding, or there was going to be some this year, and there were some property owners that were happy with it, some that were not. And it seems to me there was an issue where everybody had to agree, or you were going to go do another section of the line rather than that particular line. Anyway, I may be a great source of misinformation, but I remember that discussion.
That is the 90 people that signed the petition, is the neighborhood you're talking about.
Okay, and they said we don't want it?
No, they do want it. They
Yeah.
were trying to petition to get on the 5-year plan.
I got you. And are they on it?
Not right now.
You have to leave the turn.
Okay, Mr. Honeman, Mr. Evans.
I totally missed, I'm sorry, I was just looking at this. My question in general was, is there an assessment that you've seen from the planning department? I know that we had this meeting about Noreen over a year or so ago, I was with Mr. Trainee and Mr. Jackson. Is there deficiencies based on what we have in the ordinance you're seeing? Are you getting plans from?
We're getting the 5-year plans from MLMP and Chugach Electric. In terms of Noreen Street, we have not received any information from the attached utilities saying that they've exceeded the 2% of their yearly retail sales and thus are exempted from going underground on that project.
As required under the current ordinance?
Correct.
And your department would be the one that would get that information?
Yes.
Any questions from assembly members? Mr. Evans, sir.
Yeah, just maybe a very silly question, but I'm intrigued by the math and the time frame of this. It sounded like, at least for MLMP, where you had the more specific numbers, you're spending approximately $2 million, $1.9 million per year on this project, and you're estimating it's going to take 180 years. Does that mean essentially spread out over 180 years, this is a $360 million cost? I mean, if you all of a sudden you had the money to do it right now today, are you talking about to underground all of MLMP's area would be approximately $360 million or less, because it probably would be some cost savings in doing it that quick? I would say so. And your guys' area is slightly, it sounded like you're spending a little more, your 2% is a little bigger. I don't know if that's...
It's a little bigger because we have a little more meters. That's not an easy assumption to make because every single project is different. If you're in a clean neighborhood with no fences, no sheds, no gardens, no sidewalks, no driveways, no curb, no gutter, no asphalt, of course the project costs a little bit less. You add all of those things in one at a time. Like I said earlier, one project can eat up the whole year's worth of money. And another year, we might be able to do 3 projects because we didn't eat up everything. I can think of one we're going to do this year that's about $400,000. Well, that probably means, and I didn't stop by engineering and get a list for this year before I left to come down here. That probably means we're doing 4 or 5 projects this year with our 2%.
No.
And is
One
it
question.
And is it a requirement now that utilities will be undergrounded in new development? So we're not adding to it.
Yes.
This meeting's over. The next one starts at 1:30.